Aldrics True Reign.
France, 1918.
Isabel Hartley watched the soldiers board the train back home, knowing Lieutenant Samuel Hayes never would. He had died in battle, but as the train doors closed, her breath caught. A man in uniform stood at the window, staring at her. He raised his hand in a slow wave.
Samuel.
Chapter 1. The Ghost at Gare du Nord. The Gare du Nord station was a cacophony of farewells, a symphony of steam whistles and choked sobs. Isabel Hartley stood on the platform, a solitary figure amidst the swirling chaos of departing soldiers and their weeping loved ones. Spring, 1918. The war, everyone whispered, was nearing its end, but the air was thick with the scent of loss, not victory. The damp chill of the Parisian march seeped into her bones, mirroring the icy grief that had settled in her heart since receiving the telegram Lieutenant Samuel Hayes, killed in action. She'd come to the station not to bid farewell, but to bear witness. To see the train that should have carried Samuel home, to somehow, in this act of futile observance, acknowledge the gaping hole his absence had ripped in her world. The train was packed, a metal serpent crammed with weary men, their faces etched with the horrors they'd seen, their uniforms stained with the mud and blood of the trenches. They were going home. Samuel was not. Isabel clutched the worn, leather-bound journal she'd given him before his deployment, its pages filled with her hopes, her fears, her love, all penned in elegant script. He'd promised to return it filled with his own stories, tales of bravery and resilience. Instead, it was returned to her by a grim-faced officer, along with a handful of his personal effects, a tarnished silver locket containing a miniature portrait of her, a half-smoked cigarette, a blood-stained letter she'd written weeks ago, its ink blurred with what she desperately hoped was rain. The whistle shrieked, a piercing lament that sliced through the din doors slammed. Final embraces were exchanged, and the train began to pull away, slowly at first, then gathering speed. Isabel's eyes, blurred with unshed tears, followed its progress, a strange numbness settling over her. She was a war widow, before she'd even had a chance to be a bride. That was the cruel irony of it all. Their wedding, planned for his next leave, was now a phantom celebration, a ghost of a future that would never be. And then she saw him. He was standing at a window, his face partially obscured by the grimy glass and the shadows of the departing train. But she knew. She knew. It was the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head, the precise shade of his chestnut hair, now slightly longer and matted with what looked like dried mud. It was Samuel. Her breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp that was lost in the roar of the train. She lifted a hand, a hesitant gesture, mirroring the slow, deliberate wave he gave her. His eyes, those deep-set, hazel eyes that had always held such warmth and laughter, were fixed on hers, their expression unreadable across the growing distance. He didn't smile. He didn't mouth a word. He simply stared, a ghost in a departing train, a figment of her grief-stricken imagination, or something far more impossible. The train picked up speed, the window rapidly receding. Isabel stumbled forward, a desperate, wordless cry tearing from her lips. She ran, her long skirt tangling around her legs, her boots slipping on the wet cobblestones. "Samuel!" she cried, her voice hoarse and barely audible above the din. "Samuel! It's me, Isabel." But the train was gone, swallowed by the smoky haze of the industrial outskirts of Paris, leaving her alone on the platform, the echoes of its departure ringing in her ears. She stood there, trembling, the journal clutched to her chest, her mind reeling. Had she imagined it? Was it a cruel trick of the light, a manifestation of her overwhelming grief? Or had Samuel Hayes, the man she loved, the man she had mourned, somehow returned from the dead? The station slowly emptied, the crowds dispersing, leaving behind a desolate silence. A lone railway worker, his face lined with weariness, approached her. "Mademoiselle, are you all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Isabel looked at him, her eyes wide and unfocused. He was on the train," she whispered, her voice trembling. Samuel, he was there. The man frowned, his gaze following the direction of the departed train. There were many soldiers, mademoiselle. Many who look alike. The war changes them. No, Isabel insisted, shaking her head. It was him. I know it. She touched the locket at her throat, the cold metal a stark reminder of the tangible reality of Samuel, even in his supposed absence. The railway worker sighed, a mixture of pity and resignation in his eyes. The war does strange things, mademoiselle. To those who fight and to those who wait. He gently took her arm. Come, let me get you a cup of tea. You look like you've seen a ghost. A ghost. That's exactly what she thought she'd seen. But the image of Samuel at the window, his hand raised in that slow wave, was burned into her memory, a searing brand of hope and disbelief. She allowed the man to lead her away, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and a burgeoning, fragile hope. If it was him, how was it possible? And if it wasn't, what cruel trick was fate playing on her now? The telegram, the returned possessions, the officer's somber pronouncements, it all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Samuel was dead. Yet her heart, her very soul, refused to accept it. She had to know. She had to find out the truth, no matter how impossible, how painful it might be. The image of him at the train window was a lifeline, a thread of hope in the overwhelming darkness of her grief. And she would follow that thread, wherever it led, even if it meant confronting the ghosts of the war itself. She owed him that much, and she owed it to herself. The war may have taken him away, but she would not let it steal her hope. Not yet. Chapter 2. Whispers of a Second Chance. The tea was strong and bitter, scalding Isabel's throat, but it did little to quell the tremor that ran through her. She sat in the station's small, dimly lit cafe, the clatter of cups and the murmur of conversations a distant hum against the roaring silence in her mind. The railway worker, a kind-faced man named Monsieur Dubois, had left her with a sympathetic pat on the shoulder and a promise to make inquiries. Isabel doubted he would find anything. The army was a vast, bureaucratic machine, and one missing or supposedly dead soldier was unlikely to register amidst the ongoing chaos of the war. Still, she clung to the sliver of hope his words offered. Inquiries. The very word suggested the possibility, however remote, that Samuel's death had been a mistake. She opened the journal, her fingers tracing the embossed initials SH. On the cover, the leather was worn smooth from her constant handling, a tangible connection to the man she loved. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the familiar script, each entry a testament to their shared dreams, their stolen moments of joy amidst the looming shadow of war. There was the entry about their first meeting, a chance encounter at a Red Cross fundraiser, where she'd spilled a glass of champagne down his uniform, mortified but secretly captivated by his charming smile and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed. There were descriptions of their clandestine walks along the Seine, the whispered promises exchanged under the cloak of darkness, the shared fear of his impending deployment. And then, the agonizing silence after his last letter, the weeks of mounting dread that culminated in the arrival of that telegram. She paused at a page near the end, a passage she'd written just days before receiving the news of his death. I dream of a future where the sound of gunfire is replaced by birdsong, where the trenches are filled with flowers instead of soldiers, where our love can blossom freely, unburdened by the weight of war. I cling to that dream, Samuel, as I cling to the hope of your safe return. A tear slipped down her cheek, splashing onto the page, blurring the ink. The dream felt so distant now, so impossibly naive. Yet, the image of Samuel at the train window, his eyes fixed on hers, rekindled a flicker of that lost hope. It was a spark in the darkness, a whisper of a second chance. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the table. Isabel looked up, startled, to see a woman standing before her. She was tall and elegant, dressed in a simple but stylish gray suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her face was pale, but her eyes, a striking shade of emerald green, were sharp and intelligent. Mademoiselle Hartley? The woman asked, her voice low and controlled. Isabel nodded, her heart pounding. Yes. My name is Claire Dubois. I believe you spoke with my father, Monsieur Dubois, earlier. Isabel's breath hitched. Yes, he was very kind. Claire Dubois sat down opposite her, her movements graceful and deliberate. He told me about what you saw.
Or what you thought you saw.
There was a subtle emphasis on the word thought, a hint of skepticism in her voice. Isabel bristled slightly. I know what I saw. It was Samuel. Lieutenant Samuel Hayes. Claire studied her for a moment, her green eyes assessing. My father said you were quite distressed. Grief can play tricks on the mind, mademoiselle. I am grieving, Isabel admitted, her voice tight. But I am not delusional. I know Samuel. I would recognize him anywhere. Claire leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. Lieutenant Hayes was declared killed in action 3 weeks ago. His body was recovered. The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. Recovered. The image was brutal, visceral. She closed her eyes, fighting back the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. I understand this is difficult, Claire continued, her voice softening slightly. But you must be realistic. The chances of a mistake of this magnitude are infinitesimal. But I saw him, Isabel insisted, opening her eyes, her gaze pleading.
He looked at me. He waved.
Claire sighed, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. Look, Mademoiselle Hartley, I work for the Ministry of War. I deal with sensitive information. I know how chaotic things are, how easily mistakes can be made. But she paused, choosing her words carefully. But sometimes, the dead they don't stay dead. Not in the way we think. Isabel stared at her, bewildered. What are you saying? Claire leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. There are rumors, mademoiselle. Whispers of soldiers returning changed. Not themselves. Men who have seen too much, done too much. Men who are lost. A chill ran down Isabel's spine. Lost? Lost to the war. Lost to their memories. Lost to their identities. Claire's gaze held hers, a mixture of warning and something else. Something that looked like pity. If it was Lieutenant Hayes you saw, mademoiselle, he may not be the man you remember. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Isabel's initial surge of hope began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of unease. What if Claire was right? What if the man she saw on the train, the man who looked like Samuel, was a stranger, a shell of the man she loved, his mind fractured by the horrors of war? The thought was terrifying, yet it held a strange, unsettling logic. I need to know, Isabel said, her voice trembling. I need to find him. Claire nodded slowly. I understand. And perhaps I can help. But you must be prepared, mademoiselle, for whatever you may find. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, plain card. This is my address. Come see me tomorrow morning. We'll talk more then. Isabel took the card, her fingers trembling. The address was in a quiet, residential district of Paris, far from the bustling chaos of the Gare du Nord. It felt like a different world, a world of secrets and shadows. As Claire rose to leave, she paused, her hand resting on the back of the chair. One more thing, mademoiselle. Don't speak of this to anyone. Not yet. There are forces at work that you don't understand. Forces that could be dangerous. And with that, she was gone, leaving Isabel alone once more, the whispers of a second chance now intertwined with the chilling premonition of something far more sinister. The fragile hope she had clung to was now tinged with fear, a growing awareness that the journey to find Samuel, if he was truly alive, would be far more perilous than she could have ever imagined. She looked down at the card, tracing the elegant script of Claire Dubois' address. Tomorrow. Tomorrow she would step into a world of secrets, a world where the lines between life and death, between memory and oblivion, were blurred by the brutal realities of war. And she would face whatever awaited her, driven by the unwavering belief that the man she loved, the man she had seen on that train, was still out there, somewhere. Chapter 3. The Scars He Cannot Hide. The morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of Claire Dubois' apartment, casting long shadows across the room. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and old books, a stark contrast to the lingering smell of coal smoke and disinfectant that permeated most of Paris these days. Isabel sat on a plush velvet armchair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her nerves frayed. Claire's apartment was a reflection of its owner, elegant, understated, and filled with hidden depths. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on history, philosophy, and Isabel noticed with a flicker of surprise several books on military strategy and espionage. A delicate porcelain tea set sat on a low table, alongside a stack of official-looking documents, their contents obscured by carefully placed paperweights. Claire herself was dressed in a simple, dark blue dress, her hair pulled back in its usual severe bun. She moved with a quiet efficiency, pouring tea into the delicate cups, her movements precise and controlled. There was an air of authority about her, a sense of someone accustomed to dealing with secrets and wielding power. "I've made some inquiries," Claire said, handing Isabel a cup. Discreetly, of course. Isabel took the cup, her hand trembling slightly.
And?
Claire sat down opposite her, her green eyes studying Isabel's face. "Lieutenant Hayes' file is complicated. There are discrepancies. Inconsistencies." Isabel's heart leaped with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The official report states that he was killed in action during a German offensive near Amiens. His body was identified by a fellow officer, Captain Dubois." Isabel frowned. "Dubois? Is he related to you?" Claire gave a small nod. "He is a distant cousin. We share the same name." Her lips tightened for a moment, and there was a flicker of uncertainty on her face. "And? What is the problem?" "Captain Dubois's testimony, it's brief. Almost perfunctory. He states that he saw Lieutenant Hayes fall during a barrage of artillery fire. He claims to have recovered the body, identified it, and arranged for its burial." "But you don't believe him?" Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Claire hesitated. "I don't know what to believe. Captain Dubois has a reputation. He's known for his ambition, his ruthlessness." And she paused, choosing her words carefully. "And he was known to have disliked Lieutenant Hayes." Isabel's mind raced. Disliked?
Why?
Had there been some rivalry, some conflict between the two men? What kind of dislike? Professional jealousy, perhaps. Or something more personal. Claire's gaze drifted towards the window, her expression troubled. There were rumors, whispers of a woman. A woman both men were interested in. Isabel felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. A woman? Could this be connected to Samuel's supposed death?
Who was she? Claire shook her head.
"I don't know. The rumors were vague, unsubstantiated. But it's enough to raise doubts. Enough to make me wonder if Captain Dubois' testimony is entirely truthful." "So you think he might have lied?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling. "That Samuel might still be alive?" "It's possible," Claire said, her voice cautious. "But even if he is, he may not be the man you remember. The war, it changes people, mademoiselle. It leaves scars, both visible and invisible." Isabel thought of the man on the train, the way he hadn't smiled, the haunted look in his eyes. "I saw him, Claire. He looked different. Older. Harder." Claire nodded. "That's not surprising. The trenches, they're a hell on earth. Men who survive them are often broken. Physically, mentally, emotionally. But if he's alive, why wouldn't he come home? Why wouldn't he contact me?" Claire's gaze met hers, a mixture of pity and warning in her eyes. There could be many reasons. Amnesia. Shell shock. A desire to disappear. Or she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. Or he may be involved in something dangerous. Something that requires him to remain hidden. Isabel's mind reeled. What could Samuel possibly be involved in that would require him to fake his own death? The possibilities were terrifying, each one more unsettling than the last. "I need to find him," Isabel said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her hands. "I need to know the truth." Claire studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "The truth can be a dangerous thing, mademoiselle, especially in times of war." "I'm not afraid," Isabel said, though her heart pounded with a fear she couldn't quite articulate. I've already lost him once. I won't lose him again, without a fight. Claire smiled. A faint, almost sad smile. You have courage, mademoiselle. More than you know. But courage alone may not be enough. This is a game of shadows, a world of deception and betrayal. You must be careful. Trust no one. Not even you? Isabel asked, a flicker of doubt crossing her mind. Claire's gaze held hers, unwavering. Especially not me. I have my own secrets, mademoiselle. My own loyalties. I can help you, but only up to a point. Ultimately, you must walk this path alone. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It was a picture of Samuel, taken before the war. He was smiling, his eyes full of life and laughter, his arm around a young woman Isabel didn't recognize. The woman was beautiful, with dark hair and striking features, but there was a sadness in her eyes, a hint of vulnerability that belied her confident pose. Do you know who this is? Claire asked. Isabel shook her head, her heart aching at the sight of Samuel's carefree smile, a stark contrast to the haunted expression she'd seen on the train. Her name was Elodie Moreau, Claire said. She was a nurse. She worked at a field hospital near the front lines. And she was close to Lieutenant Hayes. Very close. Isabel felt a pang of jealousy, a sharp, unexpected stab of pain. Another woman. Another secret. The web of deception surrounding Samuel's life, or supposed death, was growing more tangled with each passing moment. What happened to her? Isabel asked, her voice tight. Claire's expression darkened. She disappeared. A few weeks before Lieutenant Hayes was reported killed. No one knows what happened to her.
Some say she was a spy.
Others say she was a casualty of war.
A spy.
Another layer of intrigue, another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. Isabel looked at the photograph again, studying Elodie Moreau's face, searching for some clue, some hint of the truth. I need to find her, Isabel said, her voice determined. If I can find her, maybe I can find Samuel. Claire nodded slowly. Perhaps. But be warned, mademoiselle. The path you're about to take is fraught with danger. And the truth may be more painful than you can imagine. The photograph, with Samuel's pre-war smile and the mysterious Elodie, felt heavy in Isabel's hand, a tangible symbol of the perilous journey ahead, the scars Samuel couldn't hide, and the secrets that lay buried beneath the surface of a war-torn world. The image was haunting, and a question raised itself. What had become of them both? Chapter 4. Letters from a Stranger. Isabel left Claire Dubois' apartment with a sense of unease and a growing determination. The photograph of Elodie Moreau was tucked safely in her bag, a tangible link to Samuel's hidden past. She needed to find out more about this woman, about her relationship with Samuel, and about her mysterious disappearance. Her first stop was the Ministry of War Archives, a vast, labyrinthine building filled with dusty files and the ghosts of countless soldiers. She spent hours poring over records, searching for any mention of Elodie Moreau, any clue that might shed light on her fate. The clerks were unhelpful, their faces impassive, their answers curt. The war had created a mountain of paperwork, a bureaucratic nightmare of records and reports, and one missing nurse was easily lost in the shuffle. Just as she was about to give up, she stumbled upon a small, forgotten file, tucked away in a dusty corner. It was Elodie Moreau's personnel file, thin and incomplete, but it contained a few tantalizing details. Elodie had been assigned to a field hospital near Amiens, the same area where Samuel had supposedly been killed. Her record was exemplary, filled with commendations for her bravery and dedication. But there was a gap in her service record, a period of several weeks before her disappearance, with no explanation. And then, at the very bottom of the file, she found something that made her heart skip a beat. A single, folded sheet of paper, addressed to Elodie Moreau, in a familiar handwriting. It was Samuel's. Isabel carefully unfolded the letter, her hands trembling. The ink was faded, the paper brittle, but the words were still legible. My dearest Elodie, the days here are endless, filled with the sounds of gunfire and the cries of the wounded. I find myself thinking of you constantly, of your smile, your kindness, your unwavering strength. You are a beacon of light in this darkness, a reminder of the beauty that still exists in this world. I know that what we have is forbidden, dangerous, but I cannot deny the feelings that consume me. You are in my thoughts, in my dreams, in my very soul. I long for the day when this war is over, when we can be together, without fear, without secrets. Until then, know that I carry your love with me, a shield against the horrors of this war. Yours eternally. Samuel. Isabel read the letter again and again, her heart aching with a mixture of grief and betrayal. So it was true. Samuel had loved another woman, a woman who had disappeared just weeks before his supposed death. The pain was sharp, a raw wound reopened. But amidst the pain, there was also a flicker of understanding. The war had forced them into impossible situations, had created bonds of love and loyalty that defied the rules of society. She carefully refolded the letter, placing it back in the file. She needed to find out more about Elodie, about her relationship with Samuel, and about the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. But where to start? As she left the archives, a thought struck her. Claire Dubois had mentioned that Elodie was a nurse. Perhaps there were other nurses who had known her, who might have some information. She decided to visit the Hôpital Militaire, the largest military hospital in Paris. It was a sprawling complex, filled with the wounded and the dying, a constant reminder of the brutal cost of war. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and despair, the sounds of moans and cries echoing through the long corridors. Isabel approached a matronly nurse, her face etched with weariness. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for information about a nurse who served here." Her name was Elodie Moreau. The nurse frowned. "Moreau? I don't recall that name." Isabel persisted. "She was assigned to a field hospital near Amiens. She disappeared a few months ago." The nurse's eyes widened slightly.
"Ah, yes.
The missing nurse." There were rumors, whispers. What kind of rumors? Isabel asked, her heart pounding. They said she was a spy, working for the Germans. Isabel recoiled. A spy? That's impossible. The nurse shrugged. Who knows?
It was wartime.
Anything was possible. But there was something else.
What?
Isabel asked, her voice urgent. There was a soldier. A lieutenant. He was very close to her. He was devastated when she disappeared. Lieutenant Samuel Hayes? Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. The nurse nodded. Yes, that was his name. He came here, asking about her.
He was frantic, desperate.
Isabel felt a surge of hope. So, Samuel had been searching for Elodie. He hadn't abandoned her. He had cared for her deeply. Do you know anything else? Isabel asked. Anything that might help me find her? The nurse hesitated. There was another nurse, a friend of Elodie's. She might know something. Her name is Marie Dubois. Another Dubois. Was this family woven into the fabric of this story? Marie Dubois. Do you know where I can find her? The nurse looked left, then right, with a wary expression. She's not here. She left some time ago. I am not sure. Perhaps she scribbled on a small piece of paper. This address. It is all I have. Isabel thanked the nurse and left the hospital, the address clutched tightly in her hand. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they were forming was becoming increasingly complex and dangerous. Samuel's love for Elodie, Elodie's disappearance, the rumors of espionage, it was all intertwined, a tangled web of secrets and lies. As she walked, she noticed a small, unassuming bookshop tucked away on a quiet side street. Something drew her to it, a sense of familiarity, a feeling that she might find something of value there. She entered the shop, the air inside cool and quiet, filled with the scent of old paper and leather. The bookseller, an elderly man with twinkling eyes and a kind smile, greeted her warmly. Can I help you, mademoiselle? Isabel hesitated, then pulled out the photograph of Elodie Moreau. I'm looking for information about this woman. She was a nurse. She disappeared a few months ago. The bookseller studied the photograph, his brow furrowed.
I recognize her?
She used to come here sometimes. She loved poetry. Romantic poetry. He smiled, a wistful expression on his face. Do you know anything about her? Isabel asked, her voice hopeful. Anything at all? The bookseller hesitated. She was troubled.
Sut.
She said she was waiting for someone. A soldier. Samuel Hayes? Isabel asked. The bookseller nodded. Yes, that was his name. She spoke of him often. She said he was different. Special. He reached under the counter and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. She gave me this, he said. She said if anything happened to her, I should give it to someone who was looking for her. Someone who loved her. Isabel took the book, her hands trembling. It was a volume of poetry by a French poet she'd never heard of. But inside, tucked between the pages, was a letter. A letter from Elodie. My dearest Isabel, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. And it means that Samuel has found you. He told me about you, about your love, about the life you plan together. I know this must be difficult for you, but I want you to know that I never meant to come between you. Samuel, he is a good man, a brave man, but he is also lost. He needs you, Isabel. He needs your love, your strength, your forgiveness. I cannot tell you everything. It is too dangerous. But I can tell you this. Samuel is not who you think he is. He has secrets. Secrets that could destroy him. Secrets that could destroy you both. Be careful, Isabel. Trust no one. And forgive him. Forgive us both. Elodie Isabel closed the book, her mind reeling. The letter was a bombshell, a revelation that shattered everything she thought she knew about Samuel. He was not who she thought he was. He had secrets. Dangerous secrets. The address. The book of poems. The letters. Were these breadcrumbs, or a trail of misdirection, meant to mislead and confuse? Chapter 5. Beneath the lavender sky. The air in Provence was thick with the scent of lavender, a heady fragrance that usually soothed Isabel's soul. But today, it did nothing to calm the turmoil within her. She'd followed the address the nurse at the Hôpital Militaire had given her, a journey that had taken her south, far from the gray skies and grim realities of Paris, to a small, sun-drenched village nestled amidst rolling hills of purple blooms. The address led her to a modest stone cottage, its walls covered in vibrant bougainvillea, its windows overlooking a breathtaking vista of lavender fields stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a scene of idyllic beauty, a world away from the trenches and hospitals, yet the sense of unease that had been gnawing at Isabel since she'd read Elodie's letter remained, a persistent shadow in the sunlight. A woman answered her knock, her face weathered by the sun, her eyes a startling shade of blue, the same shade as the lavender blossoms that surrounded her home. She was older than Isabel had expected, perhaps in her late 50s, but there was a strength in her posture, a resilience in her gaze, that spoke of a life lived fully, despite its hardships. Marie Dubois? Isabel asked, her voice hesitant. The woman nodded, her eyes studying Isabel with a mixture of curiosity and caution.
Yes.
And you are? Isabel Hartley. I was told you might be able to help me. I'm looking for information about Elodie Moreau. Marie's expression changed instantly, a flicker of sadness, perhaps even fear, crossing her face. Elodie, she was my friend. Her voice was soft, tinged with a Provençal accent. I know, Isabel said. I found a letter she wrote to me. She said Samuel was lost. That he had secrets. Marie sighed, her gaze drifting towards the lavender fields.
Come in, mademoiselle.
We have much to discuss. She led Isabel inside the cottage, the interior cool and dim, a welcome respite from the afternoon heat. The air was filled with the scent of herbs and dried flowers, a comforting, familiar aroma. The furnishings were simple but elegant, a testament to Marie's refined taste, despite her rustic surroundings. Elodie was a complicated woman, Marie said, as she poured them both a glass of cool, refreshing water. She had a good heart, a kind soul, but she was also drawn to danger.
To secrets.
She was a spy. Isabel asked the question blunt but necessary. Marie hesitated. She worked for the resistance, helping Allied soldiers escape. providing information. It was dangerous work, but she believed in it. She believed in fighting for what was right.
And Samuel?
Was he involved?
Marish Gage met Hirsch, unwavering.
Samuel was different. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also something more. He had a gift, a talent for deception, for infiltration. Isabel's mind raced. A talent for deception? What did that mean? Was Samuel a spy? Too? But for which side? He worked for British intelligence, Marie said, answering her unspoken question.
He was one of their best.
He could infiltrate enemy lines, gather information, sabotage operations. He was a master of disguise, a chameleon. Isabel felt a chill run down her spine.
So, Samuel was a spy.
And a very good one, apparently. But why hadn't he told her? Why, all the secrets? He was on a mission, Marie continued. A very dangerous mission. He was supposed to infiltrate a German intelligence network, uncover their plans, identify their agents, and Elodie? What was her role? Marie sighed. Elodie was his contact, his liaison. She provided him with information, helped him maintain his cover, and she paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. And they fell in love. Isabel nodded, her heart aching. She had already known that, from Samuel's letter, from Elodie's letter. But hearing it confirmed, from someone who had known them both, made it all the more real, all the more painful. But something went wrong, Marie continued. Someone betrayed them. The Germans discovered their operation. Elodie, she disappeared. And Samuel, he was reported killed. But he's alive, Isabel said, her voice firm. I saw him. On the train. Marie's eyes widened slightly. You saw him? Are you sure? Yes, Isabel insisted. It was him. But he looked different. Haunted. Marie nodded slowly. The war, it changes people, mademoiselle. Especially those who live in the shadows, those who deal in secrets and lies. Samuel, he saw things. He did things that would break most men. But why didn't he come home?
Why didn't he contact me?
Marie's gaze met hers, a mixture of pity and understanding in her eyes. He believes you're safer without him, mademoiselle. He believes he's tainted. Dangerous. He doesn't want to put you at risk. But I don't care about the risk, Isabel said, her voice trembling. I love him. I need to find him. Marie smiled, a faint, almost sad smile. He loves you, too, mademoiselle. More than you know. But love, sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes, it's the very thing that puts us in danger. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, wooden box. Elodie left this for you, she said. She said if anything happened to her, I should give it to you. Isabel took the box, her hands trembling. It was intricately carved, with a delicate floral design. She opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, dried lavender sprig and a small, rolled-up piece of paper. She carefully unrolled the paper, her heart pounding. It was a map of a remote location, somewhere in the French countryside. There was a single word written on the map, in Elodie's familiar handwriting. Sanctuary. What is this? Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. It's where he is, Marie said. It's where he's hiding. But be warned, mademoiselle. The path to Sanctuary is fraught with danger. And the man you find there, he may not be the man you remember. Isabel looked at the map, her mind racing. Sanctuary. It was a place of refuge, a place of safety. But it was also a place of secrets, a place where Samuel was hiding from the world, from his past, from her. The lavender fields outside seemed to stretch on forever, their beauty a stark contrast to the dangerous path that lay ahead. She had a choice to make, a choice that could change her life forever. Chapter 6. The Amnesia of War. The journey to Sanctuary was long and arduous, a testament to Samuel's desire to disappear. Isabel followed Elodie's map, traveling by train, by bus, and finally on foot, through winding country roads and dense forests, the landscape growing increasingly remote and isolated with each passing mile. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a far cry from the lavender-infused breezes of Marie Dubois' cottage. The map led her to a small, secluded valley, nestled amidst rolling hills, hidden from the prying eyes of the world. In the center of the valley stood a crumbling stone farmhouse, its walls overgrown with ivy, its windows dark and empty. It looked abandoned, forgotten, a relic of a bygone era. Yet, as Isabel approached, she saw a thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney, a subtle sign of life, a fragile beacon of hope. She hesitated at the gate, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment of truth, the moment she would face the man she loved, the man who had supposedly died, the man who was now a stranger, shrouded in secrets and shadows. She took a deep breath and pushed open the gate, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. She walked slowly towards the farmhouse, her boots crunching on the gravel path, the sound echoing in the stillness of the valley. The air was thick with anticipation, with a sense of foreboding that she couldn't quite shake. As she reached the front door, it creaked open, and a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Samuel. He was taller than she remembered, leaner, his face weathered and lined, his hair streaked with gray. He was wearing a simple, worn shirt and trousers, his clothes stained with dirt and grime. He looked like a farmer, a peasant, a man of the land, not the dashing lieutenant she had known and loved. But it was his eyes that struck her the most. They were the same hazel eyes, but they were different. They were empty, vacant, devoid of the warmth and laughter that had once filled them. They looked lost. "Isabel?" he said, his voice hoarse and raspy, a stranger's voice. He didn't smile. He didn't rush to embrace her. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's me. It's really me." He frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. I don't understand. Who are you?" Isabel's heart sank. He didn't recognize her. He didn't remember her. Amnesia. It was one of the possibilities Claire Dubois had mentioned, one of the scars the war could inflict. "I'm Isabel," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Isabel Hartley. We were engaged. We were going to be married." He shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and pain. I don't remember. I don't remember anything." "You were a soldier," Isabel continued, her voice desperate. "A lieutenant. You fought in the war." He touched his forehead, his fingers tracing a long, jagged scar that ran across his temple. "The war, I remember flashes. Images. But it's all a blur. A nightmare." "You were reported killed," Isabel said. "But you're alive. You're here." He looked around him, at the crumbling farmhouse, at the secluded valley, his expression bewildered. "Here? Where is this place? Why am I here?" "It's called Sanctuary," Isabel said. Elodie sent me." She left a map. The name Elodie seemed to trigger something in him. His eyes flickered with a flicker of recognition, a flicker of pain. "Elodie," he whispered. I remember her. A nurse. A beautiful nurse. She was your lover," Isabel said, her voice tight. "And she was a spy for the French resistance." He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "A spy? I don't understand." "You were a spy too, Samuel," Isabel said. "For British intelligence. You were on a mission. A dangerous mission." He shook his head, his hands trembling. "No, that's not possible. I'm just a farmer. A simple man." Isabel stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. He flinched, as if her touch burned him. "You're not a farmer, Samuel," she said, her voice gentle. "You're a soldier, a hero, and you're the man I love." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to find some recognition, some spark of memory. But there was nothing. Only emptiness. I don't know who I am," he whispered, his voice filled with despair. "I don't know who to trust." Isabel's heart ached for him. He was lost, adrift in a sea of amnesia, his past a blank slate, his future uncertain. But she was here. She had found him, and she wouldn't give up on him. "You can trust me, Samuel," she said, her voice firm. "I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you remember." She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. His hand was rough and calloused, the hand of a man who had worked the land, not the hand of an officer. But it was still Samuel's hand.
"Come inside," she said.
Let me tell you about us. About our life. About our love." She led him into the farmhouse, the interior dark and dusty, the air thick with the scent of decay. It was a far cry from the elegant apartments and bustling cafes of Paris, a world removed from the life they had once shared. But it was a start, a place to begin. As she sat him down at a rickety wooden table, she began to tell him their story, the story of their chance meeting, their clandestine walks, their whispered promises, their shared dreams of a future together. She spoke of his bravery, his kindness, his unwavering spirit. She spoke of her love for him, a love that had endured the war, a love that had brought her here, to this forgotten corner of France, to this man who had forgotten everything. He listened, his eyes fixed on hers, his expression slowly changing, from confusion to something else. Something that looked like hope. The amnesia of war had stolen his past, but she would help him rebuild it, piece by piece, memory by memory. Even if the process was slow, even if it was difficult, she would stay with him. It was clear the road ahead was not easy, but it was one she was ready to walk. The man she loved, the ghost from the train, was lost, but not unfindable. Chapter 7. A Dance Among the Ruins. Days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a slow, hesitant dance of rediscovery. Isabel stayed at the farmhouse with Samuel, tending to his needs, nursing him back to health, both physically and mentally. The farmhouse, once a symbol of his isolation, slowly began to feel like a home, a sanctuary not just for him, but for both of them. Isabel spent hours talking to Samuel, recounting their shared past, piecing together the fragments of his shattered memory. She showed him photographs, letters, mementos, anything that might trigger a flicker of recognition. Progress was slow, frustratingly so at times, but there were moments, fleeting glimpses of the man he once was, that gave her hope. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills, Isabel found Samuel in the small, overgrown garden behind the farmhouse. He was staring at a patch of withered rose bushes, his brow furrowed in concentration. They were beautiful, once, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. Red roses. Elodie, she loved red roses. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he'd mentioned Elodie's name without prompting, the first time he'd recalled a specific detail about her. Yes, Isabel said, her voice gentle.
She did.
You used to bring them to her, at the field hospital. He turned to her, his eyes searching hers. Did I? I don't remember. You did, Isabel said, smiling. You risked your life, crossing enemy lines, just to bring her a bouquet of roses. He touched his forehead, his fingers tracing the scar. I remember the roses. The scent, the thorns. He closed his eyes, his face contorted in pain. And the blood. Isabel rushed to his side, her arm around his waist, supporting him as he swayed. It's all right, Samuel, she said, her voice soothing. It's all right. You're safe now. He opened his eyes, his gaze focusing on hers. Safe? Am I? I feel like I'm living in a nightmare. A nightmare I can't wake up from. It's not a nightmare, Samuel, Isabel said. It's real. And you're not alone. I'm here. I'll always be here. She led him back inside the farmhouse, and as the evening deepened, they sat by the fireplace, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Isabel decided to try something different. She'd brought a small, hand-cranked gramophone with her and a collection of records. Do you remember this? She asked, holding up a record of a popular waltz they'd danced to many times before the war. He shook his head, his expression blank. Isabel placed the record on the turntable, and the scratchy sound of the music filled the room. She held out her hand to him. Dance with me, Samuel, she said. Just try. He hesitated, his eyes filled with uncertainty. But he took her hand, his touch tentative, unsure. She placed his hand on her waist, and she put her other hand on his shoulder. Just follow my lead, she whispered. They began to dance, slowly, awkwardly at first. Samuel was stiff, his movements hesitant, as if he were afraid of stepping on her toes, of making a mistake. But as the music swelled, as they moved together, something began to change. His body relaxed, his steps became more fluid, more confident. He started to hum along with the music, a faint, almost unconscious melody. And then he smiled. It was a small smile, a tentative smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. A smile that reached his eyes, a smile that reminded her of the man she had fallen in love with. I remember this, he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. I remember dancing with you. Under the stars, Isabel's heart soared. It was a breakthrough, a significant step forward. The music, the movement, the shared intimacy had unlocked a memory, a precious fragment of their past. They danced until the record ended, until the only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire and the gentle rhythm of their breathing. As they stood there in each other's arms, Samuel looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something that looked like love. Thank you, Isabel, he whispered. Thank you for not giving up on me. I'll never give up on you, Samuel, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Never. He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, tentative kiss, a kiss that held the promise of a future they would build together, brick by brick, memory by memory. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that transcended the amnesia, the secrets, the scars of war. But even as they embraced, even as they found solace in each other's arms, Isabel knew that the journey was far from over. There were still questions unanswered, secrets unresolved, dangers lurking in the shadows. The amnesia of war had stolen Samuel's past, but it hadn't erased the forces that had driven him into hiding, the forces that had made him fake his own death. As they broke apart, a sudden noise from outside shattered the quiet intimacy. A branch snapping. A rustle in the leaves. Samuel stiffened, his body instantly alert, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the windows. The soldier, the spy, the man he had been, was still there, buried beneath the surface, ready to emerge at any moment. What is it? Isabel asked, her voice anxious. He shook his head, his expression grim. I don't know, but I have a feeling we're not alone. The dance among the ruins had been a brief respite, a moment of hope and connection, but the realities of their situation, the dangers that surrounded them, were closing in. The peace of sanctuary was fragile, and the shadows were deepening. Chapter 8. The Spy in the Shadows. The sound had been subtle, easily dismissed as the wind rustling through the trees, but Samuel's instincts, honed by years of living in the shadows, were on high alert. He moved with a swiftness that surprised Isabel, extinguishing the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He pulled her down behind a heavy wooden chest, his body shielding hers. Stay here, he whispered, his voice barely audible. And don't make a sound. He moved silently towards the window, peering out into the darkness, his senses straining to detect any sign of movement, any hint of danger. The moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, casting the valley in an inky blackness. The only sound was the gentle chirping of crickets, a deceptively peaceful serenade. Isabel's heart pounded in her chest, her fear a palpable presence in the darkness. She trusted Samuel's instincts, his ability to sense danger, but the uncertainty was terrifying. Who was out there? And what did they want? Minutes stretched into an eternity, the silence broken only by the ragged rhythm of their breathing. Isabel's eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness, and she could make out the outline of Samuel's figure, tense and alert, his hand resting on the handle of a rusty old hunting knife he'd found in the farmhouse. Suddenly, a faint light flickered in the distance, a small, flickering beam moving slowly through the trees. It was a flashlight held by someone who was deliberately trying to conceal their presence. Samuel's body stiffened. He muttered a curse under his breath, a word Isabel had never heard him use before. What is it? She whispered, her voice trembling. Trouble, he replied, his voice grim. Someone's looking for us. Who? Isabel asked. The Germans? He shook his head. No. This is different. more professional, more discreet. Who, then? Isabel persisted. Captain Dubois? Samuel's eyes narrowed. Perhaps. Or someone else. Someone I thought I could trust. His words sent a chill down Isabel's spine. Someone he thought he could trust? Who could that be? Claire Dubois? Marie Dubois? The web of deception was growing more tangled, more confusing, with each passing moment. The light moved closer, its beams sweeping across the farmhouse, searching, probing. Samuel pulled Isabel closer, his body a shield against the unseen threat. We need to leave, he whispered.
Now.
He led her through the back door of the farmhouse, out into the overgrown garden, and then into the dense forest that surrounded the valley. They moved silently, swiftly, Samuel leading the way, his senses guiding them through the darkness. They walked for hours, the terrain rough and uneven, the branches of the trees snagging at their clothes, their faces scratched by thorns. Isabel stumbled several times, but Samuel's strong hand was always there to steady her, to guide her, to protect her. As dawn approached, they reached a small, hidden cave, nestled amongst a cluster of rocks. It was damp and cold, but it offered a temporary refuge, a place to rest and regroup. We'll be safe here for a while, Samuel said, his voice weary. They huddled together, sharing a small piece of bread and some dried fruit that Isabel had packed. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken questions, with the weight of their precarious situation. Who are they, Samuel? Isabel asked, breaking the silence. Who is looking for us? He hesitated, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. I don't know for sure, but I have a suspicion. A very bad suspicion. Tell me, Isabel urged. I need to know. He took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers. Before the war, before my mission, I was working with a network of spies. British intelligence. We were close. We trusted each other with our lives. And, Isabel prompted, and I think one of them betrayed me. Betrayed us all. I think one of them is working for the Germans. Isabel's blood ran cold. A traitor. Within Samuel's own network. It was a terrifying thought. Who? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Who do you suspect? He shook his head. I don't know. That's the problem. I trusted them all. But one of them is lying. One of them is responsible for Elodie's disappearance. For my condition. He touched his forehead, his fingers tracing the scar. The amnesia. The missing memories. It was all connected, a tangled web of betrayal and deception. We need to find out the truth, Isabel said, her voice firm. We need to expose the traitor. Samuel nodded, his eyes filled with a renewed determination. Yes. But we need to be careful. We can't trust anyone. Not until we know who the enemy is. He looked at Isabel, his gaze intense. I need your help, he said. I need your intuition. Your knowledge of people. You're good at reading people, Isabel. Better than I am. Isabel smiled, a faint, almost sad smile. I used to be, she said. Before the war. Before everything changed. You still are, Samuel said, his voice gentle. You haven't changed. You're still the same, Isabel. The woman I, he couldn't finish the sentence, the words catching in his throat. But Isabel knew what he meant. The woman he loved. The woman he had forgotten, but was slowly remembering. We'll do it together, she said, her hand reaching out to touch his. We'll find the traitor. We'll uncover the truth. And we'll find our way back to each other. They sat there, in the cold, damp cave, the first rays of dawn filtering through the entrance, casting a faint, ethereal light on their faces. The spy in the shadows had forced them to flee, had threatened their lives, but it had also strengthened their bond, had rekindled their determination to fight for their future, for their love, for the truth. The hunt was on, and they were in it together, two figures against a world of deception, their love a fragile but powerful weapon in the darkness. Chapter 9. Confessions in Candlelight. The cave provided temporary sanctuary, but it was far from comfortable. The dampness seeped into their bones, and the constant fear of discovery kept them on edge. They decided to move at nightfall, seeking a more secure location, a place where they could plan their next move. Samuel, despite his amnesia, retained an instinctive knowledge of the countryside, navigating through the darkness with an uncanny ease. He moved like a shadow, silent and swift, his senses alert to any sign of danger. Isabel followed close behind, trusting his instincts, his ability to protect them. They found refuge in an abandoned shepherd's hut, high on a windswept hill overlooking the valley. It was small and rudimentary, but it offered shelter from the elements and a vantage point from which they could observe any approaching threats. They lit a small candle, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, a familiar, comforting aroma. They sat close together, sharing a meager meal of bread and cheese, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. "We need to contact someone," Isabel said, breaking the silence. "Someone we can trust. Someone who can help us." Samuel frowned, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Who?" I don't remember anyone. Any names? Any faces? What about Claire Dubois?" Isabel suggested. "She works for the Ministry of War." She seemed sympathetic. "She knew about your mission." Samuel shook his head. "I don't trust her. There's something about her that doesn't feel right. My gut tells me to stay away." "But she helped me find you," Isabel protested. "She gave me Elodie's photograph, the address of Marie Dubois exactly," Samuel said, his voice sharp. "She knew too much. She was too eager to help." It's suspicious." Isabel considered his words. She had also felt a sense of unease about Claire, a subtle undercurrent of something hidden, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "What about Marie Dubois?" Isabel asked. She seemed genuinely concerned about Elodie. "About you?" Samuel hesitated. "Marie, I remember her. Vaguely. She was kind, gentle." But he paused, his eyes clouded with uncertainty. "But I can't be sure. I can't trust anyone. Not yet." The silence returned, heavier than before, filled with the weight of their distrust, their isolation. Isabel looked at Samuel, his face illuminated by the candlelight, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and determination. She wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, to reassure him, but she knew that words were not enough. He needed answers. He needed proof. "There's one person," Isabel said, a sudden thought striking her. "Someone who might be able to help us. Someone who knew Elodie. Someone who might know about the mission." "Who?" Samuel asked, his voice hopeful. "The bookseller," Isabel said. "The one in Paris. The one who gave me Elodie's letter. He said she used to visit his shop. He said she spoke of you." Samuel's eyes flickered with a flicker of recognition. "The bookseller, yes, I think I remember him. A kind old man, with twinkling eyes. He might have information," Isabel said. "He might know something about Elodie's disappearance, about the traitor." Samuel nodded slowly. "It's worth a try, but it's dangerous. Paris is crawling with spies. With enemy agents."
"I know," Isabel said.
"But we have to take the risk. We have to find out the truth." They decided to travel by night, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the back country, minimizing their chances of being detected. It would be a long and arduous journey, but they had no other choice. As they prepared to leave, Samuel paused, his hand resting on the door. "Isabel," he said, his voice hesitant. There's something I need to tell you. Something I think I remember." Isabel turned to him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his gaze meeting hers. "Elodie, she wasn't just my contact. She wasn't just my lover. She was," he paused, his voice choked with emotion. "She was my wife." The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. His wife. Elodie had been his wife. The pain was sharp, a raw wound reopened. She had known they were close, that they had loved each other, but this changed everything. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't remember," Samuel said, his voice filled with anguish. "Not until now. Not until we were in the cave. It came back to me in flashes. Images, memories." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers gentle, almost hesitant. I'm so sorry, Isabel, he said. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to betray you. Isabel looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She had known, deep down, that there were secrets, that Samuel's past was more complicated than she had imagined. But this was a revelation that shattered her world, a truth that changed the very foundation of their relationship. It's all right, Samuel, she said, her voice soft. It's the war. The war changed everything. It had forced us into impossible situations. But I loved you, Samuel said, his voice desperate. I still love you. That hasn't changed. Even with the amnesia. Even with Elodie. Isabel's heart ached for him. He was torn, divided between two loves, two lives, two worlds. The amnesia had stolen his memories, but it hadn't erased his feelings, his emotions. I love you, too, Samuel, she said, her voice trembling. But I don't know what to do. I don't know where we go from here. The confession hung in the air. What were they to do? The flickering candlelight revealed the pain, confusion, and vulnerability. Chapter 10. The weight of his silence. The journey back to Paris was fraught with tension, both external and internal. The weight of Samuel's confession hung heavy between them, a silent barrier that neither of them knew how to breach. They traveled mostly at night, avoiding contact with anyone, their fear of discovery compounded by the emotional turmoil that simmered beneath the surface. Samuel was withdrawn, lost in his own thoughts, his silences punctuated by occasional bursts of fragmented memories, none of which offered any clarity, any solace. He seemed to be wrestling with demons Isabel could only guess at, his past a battlefield of conflicting loyalties and impossible choices. Isabel, too, was struggling. Elodie's letter, Marie Dubois' words, and now Samuel's confession, had painted a picture of a love triangle born out of the chaos of war, a triangle in which she was now an unwilling participant. She loved Samuel, deeply and fiercely, but she couldn't ignore the fact that he had been married to another woman, a woman he had loved, a woman who had disappeared, possibly because of him. They reached the outskirts of Paris under the cover of darkness, the city a shadowy silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. The air was thick with the scent of coal smoke and fear, the streets deserted, the silence broken only by the occasional patrol of German soldiers. They found refuge in a small, abandoned apartment in a dilapidated building near the Seine, a place Samuel vaguely remembered from his pre-amnesia days. It was dusty and neglected, but it offered a degree of anonymity, a temporary hiding place from the prying eyes of the enemy and from the ghosts of Samuel's past. They lit a single candle, its flickering flame casting long shadows on the walls, illuminating their faces, highlighting the weariness and the uncertainty in their eyes. They hadn't spoken much during the journey, the silence a reflection of the emotional chasm that had opened up between them. We need to be careful, Samuel said, breaking the silence, his voice low and cautious. Paris is a dangerous place, especially for us. Isabel nodded, her gaze fixed on the candle flame, avoiding his eyes. The bookseller, she said. We need to find him. He might be our only hope. Samuel hesitated. I don't know, Isabel. I don't know if we can trust anyone. Not anymore. We have to trust someone, Isabel insisted, her voice trembling. We can't do this alone. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and guilt. I'm sorry, Isabel, he said, his voice hoarse. For everything. For putting you in danger. For not being the man you thought I was. Isabel reached out and touched his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. His hand was cold, trembling slightly. You are the man I thought you were, Samuel, she said, her voice gentle. And more. You're a survivor. A fighter. And you're the man I love. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to find some reassurance, some forgiveness, in her gaze. But there was a wall between them, a wall built of secrets and betrayals, a wall that neither of them knew how to break down. Elodie, Isabel said, the name a whisper in the silence. What would happen to her? Do you remember? Samuel shook his head, his eyes clouded with anguish. I don't know. I have flashes, images of us together. But it's all a blur. A nightmare. He closed his eyes, his face contorted in pain. I remember a meeting. A rendezvous. Somewhere in Paris. It was a trap. The Germans, they were waiting for us. There was gunfire. Chaos. And then nothing. I woke up in the farmhouse. With no memory. Someone betrayed you, Isabel said, her voice firm. Someone betrayed you both. Samuel nodded, his eyes filled with a dark, brooding anger.
Yes.
And I need to find out who. I need to avenge her. The word avenge sent a chill down Isabel's spine. It was a word filled with violence, with retribution. A word that spoke of a darkness she hadn't seen in Samuel before. The war had changed him, had hardened him, had left scars that went deeper than his amnesia. We need to be careful, Samuel, she said, her voice cautious. We can't just rush into things. We need a plan. We need information. He looked at her, his gaze intense.
I know, but I can't rest.
Not until I know the truth. Not until I find out what happened to Elodie. The silence returned, heavier than before, filled with the weight of his grief, his anger, his determination for revenge. Isabel knew that she couldn't stop him, that she couldn't dissuade him from seeking justice for Elodie. But she also knew that the path he was on was dangerous, that it could lead to their destruction. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the grimy windows, casting a pale, ethereal light on the room, Isabel looked at Samuel, his face etched with weariness and determination, and she knew that their journey was far from over. They were trapped in a web of secrets and lies, surrounded by enemies, both seen and unseen, and their love, their fragile, uncertain love, was the only weapon they had against the darkness that threatened to consume them. The weight of his silence, of his unspoken grief and his burning desire for revenge, hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the perilous road ahead. And a question. Where would this road end? Chapter 11. Betrayal at the front. They found the bookshop tucked away on a quiet side street, just as Isabel remembered it. The bell above the door jingled softly as they entered, the sound of familiar chime in the otherwise silent city. The air inside was cool and quiet, filled with the scent of old paper and leather, a comforting oasis in the midst of the surrounding chaos. The elderly bookseller, Monsieur Leclerc, was sitting behind the counter, his head bent over a large, leather-bound volume. He looked up as they approached, his twinkling eyes widening slightly in recognition. Mademoiselle Hartley, he said, his voice a soft, welcoming murmur. It's good to see you again. And he looked at Samuel, his brow furrowing in confusion. You look familiar.
This is Samuel Hayes, Isabel said.
He was with Elodie Moreau, the nurse. Monsieur Leclerc's eyes widened further, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even fear, crossing his face. Ah, yes, the lieutenant. I remember her speaking of him. Often. We need your help, Monsieur Leclerc, Isabel said, her voice urgent. We're looking for information about Elodie. About her disappearance. The old man hesitated, his gaze darting around the shop, as if checking for eavesdroppers. It's dangerous, mademoiselle,
to speak of such things.
The walls have ears. We know, Samuel said, his voice low and firm. But we have to take the risk. Elodie, she was my wife. And I believe she was betrayed. Murdered. Monsieur Leclerc's eyes filled with sadness. She was a good woman, Elodie.
Brave. Kind.
She didn't deserve what happened to her. Do you know anything? Isabel asked, her voice pleading. Anything that might help us find out who betrayed her? The old man sighed, his gaze drifting towards a shelf filled with poetry books, the same shelf where Elodie had once stood, browsing through the volumes. She used to come here often, he said. She loved poetry. Especially romantic poetry. He reached for a particular book, a slim volume bound in faded blue leather. She gave me this, he said. She said if anything happened to her, I should give it to someone who was looking for her. Someone who loved her. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. He had given her the same book, the book that contained Elodie's letter. I know, she said. She gave me one, too. There's something else, Monsieur Leclerc said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A few days before she disappeared, she came here. She was agitated, frightened. She said she had discovered something. Something dangerous.
What?
Samuel asked, his voice intense. What did she discover? The old man hesitated. She said there was a traitor.
A spy.
Working within the resistance. Someone who was providing information to the Germans. Isabel's blood ran cold. It was the same thing Samuel had suspected. A traitor within their own network. Did she say who? Isabel asked, her voice trembling. Monsieur Leclerc shook his head.
No. She didn't know.
But she said she had proof. Evidence. She said she was going to expose the traitor. Where is the proof? Samuel asked, his voice urgent. Where did she hide it? The old man's gaze drifted towards a small, wooden box that sat on the counter, next to the cash register. It was intricately carved, with a delicate floral design. It looked familiar. She gave me this box, he said. She said it contained the evidence. She said I should keep it safe. Until the right person came along. Isabel's heart pounded in her chest. The box. It was the same kind of box that Marie Dubois had given her, the box that contained the map to Sanctuary. Samuel reached for the box, his hand trembling. He opened it, and inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a small, folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the contents. It was a list. A list of names. Names of people within the resistance, within British intelligence. And at the very bottom of the list, circled in red ink, was a single name, Captain Julien Dubois. Samuel's face went pale. He stared at the name, his eyes filled with disbelief, with horror, with a dawning realization. Captain Dubois, he whispered, his voice hoarse. My cousin. He was the one. He betrayed us. He betrayed Elodie. Isabel gasped. Captain Dubois. Claire Dubois' distant cousin. The officer who had reported Samuel's death. The officer who had claimed to have recovered his body. It all made sense now. The discrepancies in his testimony, his ambition, his ruthlessness, his rumored dislike of Samuel. He killed her, Samuel said, his voice filled with a cold, deadly rage. He killed Elodie. And he tried to kill me. He crumpled the paper in his fist, his body trembling with anger, with grief, with the overwhelming weight of betrayal. The truth was out, revealed in the quiet sanctuary of the bookshop, a truth that shattered their world, a truth that demanded justice, retribution. We need to go, Samuel said, his voice urgent. We need to find him. We need to make him pay. He turned to leave, his eyes blazing with a fierce, determined fire. Isabel knew that she couldn't stop him, that she couldn't dissuade him from seeking revenge. But she also knew that the path he was on was dangerous, that it could lead to their destruction. Samuel, she said, her voice pleading. We need to be careful. We need a plan. He paused, his hand on the door, his back to her. There's no time for plans, Isabel, he said, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. There's only time for justice. And with that, he was gone, disappearing into the crowded streets of Paris, leaving Isabel alone in the bookshop, the scent of old paper and leather a stark contrast to the bitter taste of betrayal that filled her mouth. The front, the battlefield, had followed them to Paris. And a new battle, a personal vendetta, was about to begin. Chapter 12. The Price of Remembrance. Isabel hurried out of the bookshop, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had to find Samuel, to stop him from doing something reckless, something that could get them both killed. She scanned the crowded street, searching for any sign of him, but he had vanished, swallowed up by the anonymity of the city. She knew where he was going. He was going after Captain Dubois, the man who had betrayed them, the man who had murdered Elodie. She had to get there first, to warn Dubois, not out of any sense of loyalty, but to prevent Samuel from becoming a murderer himself, from losing himself completely to the darkness of war. She hailed a passing taxi, a rare luxury in wartime Paris, and gave the driver the address of Captain Dubois' apartment, an address she had gleaned from Claire Dubois' files. The ride was a blur of anxiety and fear, her mind conjuring up images of violence, of bloodshed, of Samuel losing himself in the abyss of revenge. The taxi dropped her off in front of a stately building in a quiet, residential district, far from the bustling chaos of the city center. She paid the driver and hurried inside, her footsteps echoing in the marble-lined lobby. She found Captain Dubois' apartment on the 3rd floor, the door slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out into the hallway. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear voices inside, muffled, indistinct, but laced with tension. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the apartment. The scene that greeted her was one of chaos and violence. Captain Dubois was lying on the floor, his face bruised and bloody, his clothes torn and disheveled. Samuel stood over him, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing with a fierce, unbridled rage. "Samuel, stop!" Isabel cried, her voice echoing in the room. Samuel turned to her, his expression wild, almost unrecognizable. "He killed her, Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse, trembling with anger. "He killed Elodie.
He deserves to die."
"I know," Isabel said, her voice pleading. "But this isn't the way.
This isn't you.
Don't let him turn you into a murderer." Samuel hesitated, his gaze flickering between Isabel and the injured man on the floor. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his body trembling with the effort to control his rage. Captain Dubois groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at Isabel, his expression filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "He's lying," Dubois stammered, his voice weak. I didn't kill her."
He looked hot.
"You betrayed her," Samuel said, his voice cold, deadly. "You betrayed us all. You sent her to her death." "No," Dubois insisted, his voice barely a whisper. It was someone else. Someone higher up. Someone in British intelligence." Samuel froze, his eyes widening in disbelief.
What?
"What are you saying?" Dubois struggled to sit up, his body racked with pain. There's a double agent," he said. "Someone at the very top. Someone who is controlling everything. Someone who ordered Elodie's death." "Who?" Samuel demanded, his voice urgent. "Who is it?" Dubois hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape. I can't tell you," he said. They'll kill me. They'll kill you both."
"Tell me!"
Samuel roared, his fist slamming down on the floor next to Dubois' head. Dubois flinched, his body trembling with fear. It's he paused, his eyes widening in terror. "It's Claire. Claire Dubois." The name hung in the air, a bombshell that shattered everything Isabel thought she knew. Claire Dubois. The woman who had helped her find Samuel. The woman who had seemed so sympathetic, so concerned. The woman who had warned her to trust no one, not even her. "No," Isabel whispered, her voice trembling.
"It can't be.
She helped me." "She played you," Dubois said, his voice weak. "She played us all. She's the one. She's the traitor." Samuel stared at Isabel, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. He had trusted Claire, had confided in her, had relied on her information. And all along, she had been the enemy, the one who had orchestrated their downfall, the one who had ordered Elodie's death. Suddenly, the door burst open, and 2 men in military uniforms stormed into the apartment, their guns drawn. They were British intelligence officers, men Samuel recognized from his pre-amnesia days. "Lieutenant Hayes," one of the officers said, his voice cold, authoritative. "You're under arrest. For treason. For the murder of Elodie Moreau." Samuel stared at them, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. He had been set up. Framed. Claire Dubois had played him perfectly, manipulating him, using him, turning him into a scapegoat for her own crimes. "No," Samuel protested, his voice desperate.
"It wasn't me."
It was Claire Dubois. She's the traitor." The officers ignored his pleas, grabbing him roughly, handcuffing him, dragging him towards the door.
"Isabel!"
Samuel cried, his voice filled with anguish.
"You have to believe me."
You have to find the truth." Isabel stood there, frozen, paralyzed by the sudden turn of events. She had come here to save Samuel from himself, from his own rage, and instead, she had walked into a trap set by the very woman she had trusted. As the officers dragged Samuel away, his eyes met hers, his gaze filled with a mixture of desperation and love. He had remembered, he had come back to her, only to be betrayed again, this time by someone she had considered an ally. The price of remembrance had been high, too high. And now, Samuel was paying the ultimate price, a victim of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power, a conspiracy that had stolen his past, his present, and his future. The apartment, the scene of violence and revelation, was now empty, except for Isabel and the injured Captain Dubois. The truth was out, but it was a truth that offered no solace, no comfort, only a deeper, more profound sense of loss and betrayal. Chapter 13. A stolen kiss in no man's land. Isabel was left reeling, the echoes of Samuel's desperate pleas ringing in her ears. She knew she had to act fast, to find a way to prove his innocence, to expose Claire Dubois' treachery.
But how?
She was alone, surrounded by enemies, with no one to trust, no one to turn to. She looked at Captain Dubois, still lying on the floor, his face pale and drawn, his breathing shallow. He was a weak, pathetic figure, a pawn in a much larger game, but he was also a key witness, the only one who could corroborate Samuel's story, the only one who could expose Claire Dubois. She knelt beside him, her voice urgent. "Dubois, you have to help me. You have to tell the truth. You have to tell them it was Claire." He looked at her, his eyes filled with fear. "I can't," he whispered. She'll kill me. She'll kill you anyway," Isabel said, her voice firm. "If you don't help me, Samuel will be executed for a crime he didn't commit. And you'll be next." He hesitated, his gaze flickering between Isabel and the door, as if expecting Claire Dubois to appear at any moment. I need protection," he said. I need a guarantee." Isabel knew she couldn't offer him any guarantees, not in this world of shadows and lies, where trust was a luxury no one could afford. But she had to try. "I'll do everything I can," she said. "I'll go to the authorities, to the British Embassy.
I'll tell them what you told me.
I'll demand protection for you." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to gauge her sincerity, her determination. "All right," he said, his voice weak. "I will help you. But you have to get me out of here. You have to hide me." Isabel knew she couldn't take him to the abandoned apartment, not with Samuel gone.
It was too risky, too exposed.
She needed a safe place, a place where no one would think to look for him. And then a thought struck her. Marie Dubois. The cottage in Provence. The lavender fields. It was a long shot, but it was the only option she had. "I know a place," she said, "but it's far. It's in the countryside." "I don't care," Dubois said. "Just get me out of here. Before she finds me." Isabel helped him to his feet, his body weak and trembling. They managed to slip out of the apartment unnoticed, avoiding the building's concierge, disappearing into the crowded streets of Paris. The journey to Provence was a nightmare, a blur of fear and exhaustion. They traveled by train, by bus, by foot, avoiding the main roads, sticking to the backcountry, their every move shrouded in secrecy. Dubois was in constant pain, his injuries slowing them down, making them vulnerable. As they neared the village, the scent of lavender filled the air, a familiar, comforting aroma that brought a flicker of hope to Isabel's weary heart. But the village was not as she remembered it. It was deserted, empty, the houses shuttered and silent, the lavender fields untended, overgrown. They approached Marie Dubois' cottage, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. Isabel's heart sank. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. They entered the cottage cautiously, their senses on high alert. The interior was a scene of chaos, of violence. Furniture was overturned, books and papers scattered across the floor, the air thick with the scent of blood. And then they found her, Marie Dubois, lying on the floor, her body lifeless, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Isabel gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a scream. She knelt beside Marie, her fingers trembling as she touched her cold skin. She was gone. Murdered. Just like Elodie. Dubois stared at the scene, his face pale with terror. She found us, he whispered. Claire, she found us. Isabel knew he was right. Claire Dubois had been here. She had silenced Marie, eliminating another witness, another threat to her power. And now they were next. Suddenly, a noise from outside shattered the silence. Footsteps. Approaching the cottage. Isabel and Dubois exchanged a look of terror. They were trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The door burst open, and a figure stood silhouetted against the fading light. It was Claire Dubois. She was holding a gun, her face a mask of cold, ruthless determination. It's over, Isabel, she said, her voice devoid of emotion.
You should have stayed out of this.
You should have let it go. Isabel stood up, facing her, her body trembling but her voice firm.
You killed them, she said.
You killed Elodie. You killed Marie. And you framed Samuel. Claire smiled, a chilling, unsettling smile. They knew too much, she said. They were liabilities. Just like you. Just like Samuel.
Why?
Isabel asked, her voice pleading. Why did you do it? Claire's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold, calculating ambition.
Power, she said. Control.
I wanted it all. And I got it.
I'm untouchable.
She raised the gun, aiming it at Isabel. Goodbye, Isabel, she said. It's been interesting. Just as she was about to pull the trigger, a shot rang out, and Claire Dubois crumpled to the floor, her body lifeless, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Isabel stared in disbelief, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't fired the shot.
Who had?
She turned to see a figure emerge from the shadows, a figure she recognized, a figure she thought she'd lost forever. It was Samuel. He was holding a gun, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. Samuel. Isabel cried, rushing to his side, embracing him, her body trembling with relief. You're alive. You're free. He held her tight, his arms strong and protective. I escaped, he said, his voice hoarse. I had to. I had to save you. He looked down at Claire Dubois' lifeless body, his expression hardening. It's over, he said. It's finally over. But it wasn't over. Not really. The scars of war, the scars of betrayal, the scars of loss, would remain, etched forever in their hearts, in their memories. They had survived. They had found each other again. But the price had been high, too high. As they stood there, in the ruins of Marie Dubois' cottage, surrounded by death and destruction, Samuel reached out and gently touched Isabel's face, his fingers tracing the tears that streamed down her cheeks. And then he kissed her. A kiss stolen in no man's land, between war and peace, between love and loss, between despair and a fragile, uncertain hope. A kiss that sealed their bond, a kiss that promised a future they would build together, amidst the ruins of their past. It had been a dark journey, this venture into the very core of wartime.
But it was not yet finished.
Chapter 14. The Promise She Cannot Keep. The aftermath of Claire Dubois' death was a whirlwind of chaos and confusion. Samuel, with the help of a few loyal contacts within the resistance, managed to clear his name, exposing Claire's treachery and revealing her network of spies. Captain Dubois, weakened but alive, provided crucial testimony, confirming Samuel's story and implicating Claire in Elodie's murder and Marie Dubois' death. The British intelligence officers who had arrested Samuel were forced to release him, their apologies grudging and insincere. The higher-ups, embarrassed by the scandal, tried to bury the story, to sweep it under the rug, but the truth had a way of surfacing, of demanding to be heard. Samuel and Isabel were hailed as heroes, their bravery and resilience lauded in whispered conversations throughout the resistance network. But the victory felt hollow, tainted by the loss, the betrayal, the scars that would never fully heal. They returned to the farmhouse in Sanctuary, seeking refuge from the storm, a place to heal, to grieve, to rebuild their shattered lives. The valley was quiet, peaceful, the lavender fields beginning to bloom again, their vibrant purple a stark contrast to the darkness they had endured. But even in this idyllic setting, the ghosts of the past lingered, haunting their dreams, casting shadows on their future. Samuel was withdrawn, haunted by the memories of Elodie, by the guilt of surviving when she had not. He spent hours in the small, overgrown garden, tending to the withered rose bushes, a silent tribute to the woman he had loved, the woman he had lost. Isabel watched him, her heart aching for him, for his pain, for his loss. She wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, to reassure him, but she knew that words were not enough. He needed time, space, to come to terms with his past, with his grief. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills, Isabel found Samuel sitting on the porch, staring out at the lavender fields, his expression lost, distant. She sat down beside him, her hand reaching out to touch his, but he flinched, pulling away from her touch. "Samuel," she said, her voice gentle.
"Talk to me, please.
"Don't shut me out." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and guilt. "I don't know what to say, Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse. "I feel like I'm living in a dream, a nightmare. I don't know who I am anymore." "You're Samuel Hayes," Isabel said, her voice firm. "The man I love. The man who survived. The man who fought for what was right." He shook his head, his eyes clouded with doubt. "But I was married to Elodie. I loved her, and I failed her. I couldn't save her." "You didn't fail her, Samuel," Isabel said. "Claire Dubois betrayed you both. It wasn't your fault." "But I made her a promise," Samuel said, his voice trembling. I promised her I would protect her. And I broke that promise." Isabel's heart ached for him. She knew that the promise he had made to Elodie, the promise he couldn't keep, was a burden he would carry forever, a weight that would never fully lift. "You can't blame yourself, Samuel," she said. "You did everything you could. You risked your life for her. For us." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to find some solace, some forgiveness, in her gaze. But there was a wall between them, a wall built of grief and guilt, a wall that neither of them knew how to break down. "I love you, Isabel," he said, his voice barely a whisper.
I truly do.
But I don't know if I can be the man you need me to be. I don't know if I can ever be free of the past." Isabel's heart sank. She had known, deep down, that their love, their fragile, uncertain love, might not be enough to overcome the scars of war, the scars of betrayal, the scars of loss. "I understand, Samuel," she said, her voice trembling. "I know it's not easy, but I'm here. I'll always be here. For you. Whenever you're ready." He reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers gentle, almost hesitant. You're an amazing woman, Isabel," he said.
"Strong, brave, kind.
You deserve better than me. You deserve a life of happiness, of peace." "I don't want a life without you, Samuel," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I love you. I'll wait for you, however long it takes." He smiled, a faint, almost sad smile. "You shouldn't wait for me, Isabel," he said. "You shouldn't waste your life on a broken man. A man who can't forget the past." He stood up, his gaze drifting towards the lavender fields, towards the setting sun. I need some time," he said. I need to be alone.
To think.
To heal." Isabel knew what he was saying. He was leaving. He was walking away. From her. From their love. From their future. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He shrugged, his shoulders slumping.
"I don't know," he said.
"Somewhere far away. Somewhere where I can forget. Where I can start over." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "Goodbye, Isabel," he said.
"Thank you.
For everything." And with that, he walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the evening, leaving Isabel alone on the porch, the scent of lavender a bittersweet reminder of the love they had shared, the love they had lost. The promise she couldn't keep, the promise of a future together, hung heavy in the air, a silent testament to the enduring power of grief, of guilt, of the scars of war. She was alone, and the stillness was overwhelming. Chapter 15. Echoes of a Lost Life. Isabel stayed at the farmhouse for a few weeks after Samuel left, hoping against hope that he would return, that he would change his mind, that their love would somehow prevail over the ghosts of his past. But he didn't come back. He had vanished, disappeared into the vastness of the world, leaving her alone with her memories, with her grief, with the shattered remnants of their dreams. She tended to the garden, nurturing the withered rose bushes, coaxing them back to life, a silent tribute to Samuel, to Elodie, to the love that had bloomed and withered in this secluded valley. The lavender fields, once a symbol of hope and beauty, now seemed to mock her, their vibrant purple a stark contrast to the emptiness she felt inside. She knew she couldn't stay there forever, that she had to move on, to rebuild her life, to find a way to live with the pain, with the loss. But where to go? What to do? She had no family, no friends, no connections, her life before Samuel a distant, faded memory. She decided to return to Paris, to the city where she had met Samuel, where their love had blossomed, where their world had shattered. It was a painful choice, a journey back into the heart of her grief, but she felt drawn to it, compelled to revisit the places, the memories that had shaped her, that had defined her. She found a small, modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the bustling center, a place where she could be anonymous, a place where she could hide from the world, from the pitying glances, from the well-meaning but ultimately empty words of comfort. She found a job as a clerk in a small bookstore, a fitting refuge for a woman who had found solace in words, in stories, in the shared experiences of others. The work was mundane, repetitive, but it offered a distraction, a way to fill the empty hours, to numb the pain. She walked the streets of Paris, revisiting the places she and Samuel had frequented, the cafes, the parks, the bridges over the Seine, each location a poignant reminder of their love, of their loss. She would stand there, for hours, lost in her memories, imagining him beside her, his arm around her waist, his laughter echoing in her ears. But the echoes of their lost life were fading, becoming fainter, more distant, with each passing day. The pain was still there, a constant ache in her heart, but it was changing, morphing, becoming a dull, persistent throb, a part of her, an integral part of her being. One afternoon, as she was walking along the Seine, she saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench, staring out at the water. It was Monsieur Leclerc, the elderly bookseller, the man who had given her Elodie's letter, the man who had revealed the truth about Captain Dubois. She approached him cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. He looked older, more frail, his twinkling eyes dimmed by sadness, by the weight of the secrets he had kept. "Monsieur Leclerc," she said, her voice hesitant. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly in recognition. "Mademoiselle Hartley," he said, his voice a soft, weary murmur. It's good to see you again. I heard about what happened. About Lieutenant Hayes." Isabel nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "He's gone," she said, her voice choked with emotion.
He left.
He couldn't face the past." Monsieur Leclerc sighed, his gaze drifting back to the water. "The war, it changes people, mademoiselle. It leaves scars that never fully heal." "I know," Isabel said. But I loved him. I still love him." The old man looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. "Love, it's a powerful force, mademoiselle. But sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes we have to let go. We have to move on." His words struck her, a painful truth that she had been avoiding, resisting. She knew he was right, that she couldn't cling to the past, to the memory of Samuel, forever. But how to let go? How to move on? I don't know how," she whispered, her voice trembling. Monsieur Leclerc reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle, comforting. "You're strong, mademoiselle," he said. "You're brave. You survived the war. You survived betrayal. You can survive this, too." He paused, his gaze searching hers.
There's something I need to tell you, he said.
Something about Elodie. Something I should have told you before. Isabel's heart skipped a beat. What was it? What secret had the old man kept hidden? Before she disappeared, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Elodie, she came to me. She was pregnant. With Samuel's child. The words hit Isabel like a physical blow. Pregnant. Elodie had been pregnant. With Samuel's child. A child that had never been born, a child that had been lost, along with its mother. The pain was overwhelming, a wave of grief that washed over her, threatening to drown her. She stared at Monsieur Leclerc, her eyes wide with disbelief, with horror, with a profound sense of loss. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice trembling. No one knew, Monsieur Leclerc said. Except me. And Claire Dubois. Claire Dubois. The name, even in death, still held the power to chill her, to remind her of the betrayal, the deception, the darkness that had consumed their lives. Claire she knew? Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Monsieur Leclerc nodded. Elodie, she confided in Claire. She trusted her. She thought she was her friend. He paused, his eyes filled with sadness. Claire, she used that information. She used it to manipulate Samuel, to control him. She threatened to expose Elodie, to harm the child, if he didn't cooperate. Isabel's mind reeled. So that was it. That was the final piece of the puzzle. Claire Dubois' ultimate weapon, the leverage she had used to control Samuel, to force him into a life of espionage, of danger, of betrayal. The echoes of a lost life, of a lost love, of a lost child, swirled around her, a symphony of grief and regret. She had loved Samuel, she had lost him, and now, she had lost even the possibility of a future with him, a future that had been stolen from them, by the cruelty of war, by the treachery of a woman driven by ambition and greed. She sat, in the fading light, the sounds of Paris fading into a soft and distant hush.
She had a choice to make.
Chapter 16. The Unraveling Secret. The revelation of Elodie's pregnancy, of Claire Dubois' final act of manipulation, left Isabel shattered, adrift in a sea of grief and anger. She returned to her small apartment, the walls closing in on her, the silence deafening. She felt lost, alone, the weight of the past crushing her, the future a bleak, uncertain prospect. She spent days and a days, unable to eat, unable to sleep, haunted by the image of Elodie, pregnant, vulnerable, betrayed by the woman she had trusted. She thought of Samuel, of the burden he had carried, the guilt he had felt, the impossible choices he had been forced to make. She knew she had to do something, to find some way to honor Elodie's memory, to expose Claire Dubois' crimes, to bring some semblance of justice to the victims of her treachery.
But how?
Where to start? She decided to revisit the Ministry of War archives, the place where she had first discovered Samuel's letter to Elodie, the place where the truth had begun to unravel. She needed to find more information, more evidence, to piece together the full extent of Claire Dubois' network, her crimes, her motives. The archives were vast, labyrinthine, a repository of secrets, of lies, of the bureaucratic machinery of war. She spent hours poring over files, searching for any mention of Claire Dubois, any clue that might shed light on her activities. She discovered that Claire had been involved in numerous covert operations, her name appearing on countless documents, reports, memos, always in a position of authority, of control. She had access to sensitive information, to classified intelligence, to the very heart of the British war effort. And then she found it, a small, unassuming file, tucked away in a dusty corner, a file that had been deliberately mislabeled, hidden from prying eyes. It was Claire Dubois' personnel file, but it contained much more than just her employment history. It contained a detailed account of her activities, her contacts, her network of spies, her involvement in various clandestine operations, including the one that had led to Elodie's death. And at the very bottom of the file, she found something that made her blood run cold. A handwritten note, signed by Claire Dubois herself, authorizing the termination of Elodie Moreau, citing her pregnancy as a security risk, a liability to the mission. The note was cold, callous, devoid of any emotion, any remorse. It was the smoking gun, the irrefutable proof of Claire's guilt. Isabel's hands trembled as she held the note, her heart pounding in her chest. She had found it, the evidence she needed to expose Claire's treachery, to clear Samuel's name, to bring some measure of justice to Elodie, to Marie Dubois, to all the victims of Claire's ambition. But who to trust? Who to take the evidence to? The Ministry of War was riddled with corruption, with spies, with people who had been complicit in Claire's crimes. She couldn't go to the authorities, not yet. She needed to find someone outside the system, someone who was untainted, someone who would believe her, someone who would help her. And then she remembered. The British Embassy. The ambassador. He was a man of integrity, of honor, a man who had a reputation for fairness, for justice. He was her only hope. She carefully copied the note, placing the original back in the file, ensuring that it remained hidden, undisturbed. She left the archives, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She had the evidence, she had the truth, and she would not rest until she had exposed Claire Dubois' crimes, until she had brought justice to the victims of her treachery. She hailed a taxi, giving the driver the address of the British Embassy, her mind racing, formulating a plan, preparing for the confrontation that lay ahead. She knew it would be dangerous, that she would be putting herself at risk, but she didn't care. She had nothing left to lose. As the taxi sped through the streets of Paris, Isabel looked out at the city, at the people, at the life that went on, oblivious to the secrets, the lies, the betrayals that lurked beneath the surface. She was a lone woman, armed only with the truth, facing a powerful, ruthless enemy. But she was not afraid. She was determined. She would fight for justice, for Elodie, for Samuel, for all those who had suffered at the hands of Claire Dubois. The unraveling secret had been revealed, and now it was time for the reckoning. Chapter 17. Across the Barricades. The British Embassy in Paris was a fortress of imposing grandeur, a symbol of power and authority in the heart of the war-torn city. Isabel stood before its gates, her heart pounding, her resolve wavering for a moment. She was a lone woman, armed only with a copy of a handwritten note, facing a formidable institution, a web of bureaucracy and intrigue. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation ahead. She had come too far to turn back now. She had to expose Claire Dubois' crimes, to clear Samuel's name, to bring some semblance of justice to the victims of her treachery. She approached the guard at the gate, her voice trembling slightly.
"I need to see the ambassador," she said.
"It's a matter of utmost importance." The guard, a stoic, impassive figure in a crisp uniform, eyed her skeptically. "Do you have an appointment, mademoiselle?"
"No," Isabel said.
"But it's urgent. It concerns a matter of national security." The guard hesitated, his gaze flickering between Isabel and the imposing building behind him. He had clearly dealt with his share of cranks and eccentrics, but there was something in Isabel's eyes, a desperation, a determination, that made him pause. "Wait here," he said, disappearing into a small guardhouse. Isabel waited, her nerves frayed, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. She clutched the copy of Claire Dubois' note in her hand, the paper crinkling slightly, the ink a stark reminder of the betrayal, the deception, the darkness she was about to expose. Finally, the guard returned, his expression still impassive, but with a hint of something else. Curiosity? Concern? "The ambassador will see you," he said. "Follow me." He led her through the gates, across a manicured courtyard, and into the embassy building, the interior a labyrinth of corridors, offices, and hushed conversations. The air was thick with the scent of power, of privilege, of secrets. She was ushered into a large, opulent office, its walls lined with portraits of British monarchs and dignitaries, its windows overlooking the bustling city below. The ambassador, a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, was sitting behind a massive desk, his expression stern, imposing. Mademoiselle Hartley, is it? He said, his voice deep, resonant. You claim to have information of utmost importance concerning national security. Isabel nodded, her voice trembling slightly. Yes, sir. I have evidence. Evidence of a traitor.
A spy.
Working within British intelligence. The ambassador's eyebrows rose slightly, his gaze sharpening. A serious accusation, mademoiselle. Do you have proof? Isabel stepped forward, placing the copy of Claire Du Bois' note on the desk. This is a copy of a handwritten note, she said. Signed by Claire Du Bois, authorizing the determination of Elodie Moreau, a British agent, a nurse. She was pregnant with Samuel Hayes' child. The ambassador picked up the note, his eyes scanning the contents. His expression changed, from skepticism to shock. He read the note again, his brow furrowing, his lips tightening. This is extraordinary, he said, his voice low, controlled. Claire Du Bois, she was one of our most trusted operatives. She had access to highly sensitive information. She used that information, Isabel said, her voice firm. She betrayed us all. She murdered Elodie. She murdered Marie Du Bois. She framed Samuel Hayes. She was working for the Germans. The ambassador looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Do you have any other evidence, mademoiselle? Anything to corroborate this extraordinary claim? Isabel hesitated. She had the original note, safely hidden in the archives, but she couldn't reveal its location. Not yet. She didn't trust anyone, not completely.
There's a witness, she said.
A Captain Julien Du Bois. He knows the truth. He can confirm everything. The ambassador nodded slowly. Captain Du Bois, yes, I know of him. He was injured in an altercation with Lieutenant Hayes.
It was Claire Du Bois, Isabel said.
She set them up. She manipulated them both. The ambassador stood up, his gaze fixed on the note, his mind clearly racing, assessing the information, weighing the implications. This is a matter of grave concern, mademoiselle, he said. If what you say is true, it could have serious consequences. For the war effort. For everything. He paused, his eyes searching hers. I need to verify this information, he said. I need to investigate.
Discreetly. Thoroughly.
I understand, sir, Isabel said. But please. You have to protect Samuel Hayes. He's innocent. He's a victim of Claire Du Bois' treachery. The ambassador nodded. I will see to it that Lieutenant Hayes is protected, he said. And I will ensure that justice is served. He reached for a telephone on his desk. I need to make some calls, he said. I need to alert the authorities. In London. As he spoke, a commotion erupted outside the office. The sound of shouting, of running footsteps, of gunfire. The ambassador's eyes widened in alarm. What's going on? He demanded. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a group of armed men stormed into the room, their weapons trained on the ambassador, on Isabel. They were not British soldiers. They were not German soldiers. They were something else. They were Claire Du Bois' men. Her network of spies, her loyal followers, the ones who had carried out her orders, who had protected her, who had enabled her treachery. The leader of the group, a tall, menacing figure with a cold, ruthless expression, stepped forward. It's over, ambassador, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Claire Du Bois sends her regards. Isabel stared in disbelief, in horror. Claire Du Bois was dead. She had seen her body, lying lifeless on the floor of Marie Du Bois' cottage. But her network, her legacy of darkness, lived on. Across the barricades of loyalty and betrayal, of truth and lies, a new battle was about to begin. The embassy, a supposed bastion of safety, was now a trap. Chapter 18. The Reckoning of His Past. The situation inside the ambassador's office deteriorated rapidly. The armed men, Claire Du Bois loyalists, were clearly intent on silencing anyone who could expose their network, on eliminating any threat to their continued operation. The ambassador, despite his initial shock, reacted with surprising courage, attempting to reason with the intruders, to stall for time, to find some way to defuse the situation. Isabel, however, knew that there was no reasoning with these men. They were fanatics, driven by a blind loyalty to a dead woman, to a lost cause. She had to find a way to escape, to alert the authorities, to bring help. As the leader of the group argued with the ambassador, Isabel saw her chance. She edged towards a large window overlooking the courtyard, her movements slow, deliberate, hoping to avoid attracting attention. The window was latched, but not locked. She carefully unlatched the window, her hands trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She pushed it open slightly, a gust of fresh air filling the room, carrying with it the sounds of the city, the distant rumble of traffic, the faint echoes of life beyond the embassy walls. Just as she was about to slip through the window, one of the armed men noticed her. He shouted, raising his gun, aiming it at her. "Stop her," he yelled. Isabel didn't hesitate. She threw herself through the window, tumbling onto the hard stone pavement of the courtyard below. She landed awkwardly, pain shooting through her ankle, but she forced herself to her feet, ignoring the pain, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She ran, her footsteps echoing in the courtyard, the shouts of the armed men pursuing her. She had to reach the gate, to alert the guard, to bring help. She could hear them behind her, their footsteps gaining on her, their shouts growing louder. She knew she couldn't outrun them, not with her injured ankle. She needed to find a place to hide, to buy herself some time. She spotted a small shed, tucked away in a corner of the courtyard, its door slightly ajar. She darted inside, pulling the door shut behind her, plunging herself into darkness. She huddled in the corner, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She could hear the armed men searching for her, their voices close, menacing. "She's here somewhere," one of them said. "Find her." They were searching the courtyard, systematically, thoroughly. It was only a matter of time before they found her. Suddenly, a voice from the shadows startled her. "Isabel?" She turned, her eyes widening in disbelief. It was Samuel. He was standing in the corner of the shed, his face hidden in the darkness, but she recognized his voice, his presence. "Samuel," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. What are you doing here?" "I followed you," he said, his voice low, urgent. I knew you were in danger. I had to protect you." He stepped forward, his face illuminated by a sliver of light filtering through a crack in the door. He looked different. Stronger. More determined. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a fierce, unwavering resolve. "How did you know?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling. I have contacts," he said. "Within the resistance. They alerted me. About Claire Dubois' network. About their plans." He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle, reassuring. "We need to get out of here," he said. "Now." He led her to the back of the shed, where a small window overlooked a narrow alleyway. He pushed it open, and together, they slipped through the window, disappearing into the shadows of the city. They found refuge in a small, hidden apartment, a safe house used by the resistance, a place where they could regroup, plan their next move. Samuel, despite his recent trauma, his amnesia, his grief, seemed to have regained his sense of purpose, his determination to fight for justice, to expose the truth. "They're still out there," he said, his voice grim. "Claire Dubois' network. They're powerful, ruthless. We need to stop them." "But how?" Isabel asked. "The ambassador, he's trapped. They'll kill him." Samuel nodded. "I know. We need to alert the authorities. In London. Directly. We need to bypass the embassy. We need to expose the conspiracy." He had a plan, a daring, dangerous plan, to contact a high-ranking official in British intelligence, a man he had worked with before the war, a man he trusted, a man who could expose Claire Dubois' network and bring her followers to justice. The plan involved infiltrating a heavily guarded communications center, sending a coded message directly to London, bypassing the usual channels, avoiding any potential interception by Claire Dubois loyalists. It was a risky operation, a suicide mission, but they had no other choice. They had to expose the truth, to save the ambassador, to bring justice to the victims of Claire Dubois' treachery. As they prepared for the mission, Samuel looked at Isabel, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and regret. "I'm sorry, Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse. For everything. For leaving you. For not being the man you thought I was." Isabel reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers gentle, loving. "You are the man I thought you were, Samuel," she said. "And more. You're a hero. You're a survivor. And you're the man I love." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that held the promise of a future they might not have, a future they would fight for, together. The reckoning of his past was upon them, and they would stand as one, to face their enemies. Chapter 19. A Love Forged in Fire. The communications center was a fortress within a fortress, a heavily guarded building in the heart of occupied Paris, a hub of coded messages, secret transmissions, the nerve center of the German war effort. Samuel and Isabel, disguised as maintenance workers, managed to slip past the initial security checkpoints, their forged credentials and their carefully rehearsed story proving surprisingly effective. The interior of the building was a labyrinth of corridors, offices, and equipment rooms, the air thick with the hum of machinery, the clatter of typewriters, the murmur of hushed conversations. They moved cautiously, avoiding contact with anyone, their senses on high alert, their every step fraught with danger. Samuel, despite his amnesia, retained an instinctive knowledge of covert operations, navigating the complex layout of the building with an uncanny ease. He moved like a shadow, silent and swift, his instincts honed by years of living in the shadows, of dealing in secrets and lies. Isabel followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest, her fear a palpable presence in the dimly lit corridors. She trusted Samuel, his skills, his experience, but the risk was enormous, the consequences of failure unthinkable. They reached the designated communications room, a small, windowless chamber filled with rows of complex equipment, blinking lights, and the constant hum of electronic activity. The room was empty, a stroke of luck, a brief window of opportunity. Samuel quickly located the designated transmitter, a powerful device capable of sending coded messages directly to London, bypassing the usual channels, avoiding any potential interception by Claire Du Bois loyalists. He began to work, his fingers flying over the controls, inputting the coded message, his movements precise, efficient, a testament to his training, his experience. Isabel stood guard, her eyes scanning the corridor, her ears straining for any sign of approaching danger. The silence was oppressive, the tension almost unbearable. Suddenly, a noise from the corridor shattered the silence. Footsteps. Approaching the room. Isabel's heart leaped into her throat. They had been discovered. She signaled to Samuel, her eyes wide with alarm. He nodded, his expression grim, his fingers still working furiously on the transmitter. The door to the communications room burst open, and 2 German soldiers stormed in, their rifles raised, their faces hardened with suspicion.
"Halt!"
one of the soldiers shouted. "What are you doing here?" Samuel ignored them, continuing to work on the transmitter, his movements frantic, desperate. He had to send the message, to alert London, to expose the conspiracy. Isabel knew she had to buy him time, to distract the soldiers, to give him a chance to complete his mission. She stepped forward, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "We were just maintenance workers," she said, her voice trembling slightly. We were told to check the equipment. There's been a malfunction." The soldiers eyed her skeptically, their rifles still trained on her, on Samuel. "Identification," one of the soldiers demanded. Isabel fumbled in her pocket, pretending to search for her forged credentials, her mind racing, searching for a way out of this impossible situation. Suddenly, Samuel shouted, "Now, Isabel." Isabel didn't hesitate. She lunged at the nearest soldier, knocking his rifle aside, throwing him off balance. The other soldier fired, the bullet whizzing past her ear, embedding itself in the wall. Samuel, having sent the message, grabbed a heavy wrench from a nearby toolbox, swinging it at the second soldier, striking him on the head, knocking him unconscious. The first soldier, recovering from Isabel's attack, lunged at Samuel, tackling him to the ground. They grappled, struggling for control of the wrench, the fight brutal, desperate. Isabel, seeing Samuel in danger, grabbed the fallen soldier's rifle, her hands trembling, her mind racing. She had never fired a gun before, had never even held one, but she knew she had to act, to save Samuel, to protect their mission. She aimed the rifle at the soldier struggling with Samuel, her finger on the trigger, her body shaking with fear, with adrenaline. "Stop," she shouted, her voice surprisingly firm. "Or I'll shoot." The soldier froze, his eyes widening in surprise, in fear. He slowly released Samuel, raising his hands in surrender. Samuel stood up, his chest heaving, his face bruised and bloody, but his eyes filled with a fierce, unwavering determination. "It's done," he said, his voice hoarse. The message it sent. They had done it. Against all odds, they had succeeded in their mission, in alerting London to the conspiracy, in exposing Claire du Bois' network. But the danger was far from over. They were still trapped inside the communications center, surrounded by enemies, with no easy way out. As they stood there, in the aftermath of the struggle, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder, closer. Reinforcements were on their way. Samuel looked at Isabel, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. You saved my life." "We saved each other," Isabel said, her voice trembling. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle, reassuring. "We need to go," he said. "Now." They slipped out of the communications room, disappearing into the labyrinthine corridors of the building, the sound of sirens echoing behind them, a constant reminder of the perilous journey ahead. Their love, forged in the fire of adversity, of betrayal, of war, was their only weapon, their only shield, against the darkness that surrounded them. Chapter 20. The Journey Home. Their escape from the communications center was a blur of adrenaline-fueled action and sheer luck. They navigated the maze of corridors, dodging patrols, hiding in shadows, their forged credentials proving surprisingly resilient, their shared determination their only compass. They managed to slip out of the building unnoticed, disappearing into the chaotic streets of Paris, the sirens fading behind them, a testament to their narrow escape. They found refuge in a small, abandoned apartment, a safe house used by the resistance, a place where they could catch their breath, assess their situation, plan their next move. They were exhausted, bruised, and shaken, but they were alive, and they had succeeded in their mission. The message had been sent, London had been alerted, and Claire du Bois' network, her legacy of darkness, was about to be dismantled. But the danger was far from over. They were still fugitives, hunted by both the Germans and the remnants of Claire du Bois loyalists, their faces likely plastered on wanted posters throughout the city. They needed to get out of Paris, out of France, to find a safe haven, a place where they could start over, rebuild their lives. Samuel, using his contacts within the resistance, arranged for their escape, a perilous journey across occupied France, through a network of safe houses, secret routes, and courageous individuals who risked their lives to help those fleeing the Nazi regime. The journey was long and arduous, filled with close calls, near misses, and constant fear. They traveled by night, avoiding the main roads, hiding in barns, in cellars, in abandoned buildings, their every move shrouded in secrecy. They relied on the kindness of strangers, on the bravery of the resistance fighters, on their own resilience and determination. Isabel, despite her initial fear, proved to be a resourceful and courageous companion, her quick thinking and her unwavering support proving invaluable to Samuel, to their survival. She had come a long way from the grieving widow who had seen a ghost on a train platform, a woman transformed by love, by loss, by the crucible of war. Samuel, too, was changing. The haunted look in his eyes was gradually fading, replaced by a newfound clarity, a sense of purpose, a determination to live, to honor the memory of Elodie, to build a future with Isabel. The amnesia was still there, fragments of his past still missing, but he was no longer defined by it, no longer consumed by it. He was moving forward, embracing the present, embracing the possibility of a future free from the shadows of war. As they neared the coast, the air grew thick with the scent of salt and sea, a promise of freedom, of escape. They reached a small, secluded fishing village, a hidden haven on the rugged coastline of Brittany, a place where a small boat awaited them, a vessel that would carry them across the English Channel, to safety, to a new life. The night was dark, the sea rough, the wind howling, a fitting backdrop for their final escape. They boarded the small boat, a rickety, fragile craft, their hearts pounding in their chests, their hopes and fears intertwined. As the boat pulled away from the shore, leaving the lights of France behind, fading into the darkness, Samuel looked at Isabel, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and gratitude. "We made it," he said, his voice barely a whisper, the sound lost in the wind and the waves. Isabel nodded, her eyes filled with tears, tears of relief, of joy, of a love that had endured the trials of war, of betrayal, of loss. "We made it," she repeated, her voice trembling. They huddled together, seeking warmth and comfort in each other's arms, the small boat pitching and rolling in the turbulent sea, the journey ahead uncertain, but their love, their shared resilience, their unwavering hope, a guiding light in the darkness. The journey home was not just a physical journey, a crossing of the English Channel, but a journey of the heart, a journey of healing, of forgiveness, of rediscovery. They had faced the darkness, they had confronted their demons, and they had emerged, scarred but stronger, their love forged in the fire of adversity, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. As the dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, they saw the white cliffs of Dover in the distance, a beacon of hope, a symbol of freedom, a promise of a new life. They had come home, not to the lives they had once known, but to a future they would build together, a future free from the shadows of war, a future filled with the promise of love, of peace, of a happiness they had earned, a happiness they deserved. The final chapter had arrived. Epilogue. The years that followed were a testament to their resilience, their love, their unwavering commitment to building a life together, a life free from the shadows of the past. They settled in a small village in the English countryside, far from the bustling cities, far from the memories of war, a place where they could heal, where they could find peace, where they could start anew. Samuel, with the help of a skilled therapist, slowly began to recover fragments of his lost memories, piecing together the shattered remnants of his past, confronting the demons that had haunted him for so long. The amnesia never fully lifted, some parts of his life forever lost, but he learned to live with it, to accept it, to embrace the present, to focus on the future. Isabel, ever patient, ever loving, was his constant support, his anchor, his guiding light. She helped him navigate the complexities of his recovered memories. She comforted him during his nightmares. She celebrated his triumphs. She shared his sorrows. She was his wife, his partner, his soulmate, the woman who had stood by him through the darkest of times, the woman who had never given up on him. They had children, 2 beautiful daughters, who filled their lives with joy, with laughter, with the innocent wonder of childhood. They named their first daughter Elodie, a tribute to the woman Samuel had loved, the woman who had sacrificed her life for a cause she believed in, a woman who would never be forgotten. They lived a simple life, a quiet life, a life filled with love, with family, with the gentle rhythm of the countryside. Samuel found work as a carpenter, his hands, once skilled at espionage and deception, now crafting furniture, toys, objects of beauty and utility. Isabel tended to their garden, growing flowers, vegetables, herbs, nurturing life, creating a haven of peace and tranquility. They never forgot the war, the sacrifices, the betrayals, the losses. They honored the memory of those who had perished. They supported the veterans. They worked for peace, for a world free from the horrors they had witnessed. As the years turned into decades, their love deepened, matured, becoming a source of strength, of comfort, of unwavering support. They had faced the darkness together, and they had emerged stronger, wiser, their bond unbreakable. One evening, as the sun set over the rolling hills of the English countryside, casting a golden glow over their small cottage. Samuel and Isabel sat on their porch, holding hands, watching their grandchildren play in the garden. Samuel looked at Isabel, his eyes, now filled with a gentle peace, a quiet contentment, reflecting the love he felt for her, the gratitude he felt for her unwavering devotion. "I never thought I'd find happiness again," he said, his voice soft, filled with emotion. After everything. After Elodie. After the war." Isabel smiled, her eyes, still bright and beautiful, reflecting the love she felt for him, the joy she felt in their shared life. "We found it together, Samuel," she said. "We built it. Together." He leaned over and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss, a kiss that spoke of a love that had endured the test of time, a love that had triumphed over adversity, a love that would last forever. The echoes of the past, the whispers of war, the shadows of betrayal, were still there, but they no longer defined them.